The stars were cold and distant in this part of space. No one had ever traveled here before. No human eyes had ever seen these ancient lights, and no human ship had ever cut through this endless darkness. Until now. The Quiet Defiance was a small ship. She was not built for war. She was built to explore, to map the unknown, to find new worlds and new wonders. Her hull was painted white, and her engines hummed softly as she drifted through the void between spiral arms of the galaxy. 2,000 light-years from Earth, she was alone in a way that few humans had ever experienced. Captain stood on the bridge and watched the stars through the main viewport. She was a small woman with sharp eyes and gray streaks in her black hair. She had commanded this ship for 7 years, and she knew every sound she made, every vibration in her bones. The Quiet Defiance was more than a vessel to her. She was home. 12 souls lived aboard this ship. Scientists who studied the stars, engineers who kept the engines running, pilots who guided them through the dark, and one old diplomat named who had come along because he said he wanted to see something beautiful before he died. Was 73 years old. His hands shook when he held his coffee cup, and his eyes were clouded with age. But his mind was still sharp, and his voice still carried the weight of a man who had spent 40 years negotiating peace between nations that wanted to destroy each other. He sat in the observation lounge most days, reading old books and watching the universe drift by. On this particular day, everything changed. The sensor officer, a young man named David, was the first to notice something strange. His screens flickered with data that made no sense. A gravitational anomaly had appeared on their scanners. Something massive was bending space itself, creating ripples in the fabric of reality. Captain walked to his station and looked at the readings. Her face remained calm, but her heart began to beat faster. In all her years of exploration, she had never seen anything like this. Before she could give an order, the anomaly split open like a wound in the universe. Light poured through, harsh and blinding, and then the ships came. 1, 5, 10. 17 warships emerged from the tier in space, each one larger than anything humans had ever built. They were black and angular, covered in weapons that glowed with deadly energy. They surrounded the Quiet Defiance like wolves circling a wounded deer. The bridge fell silent. Every crew member stared at the alien vessels with wide eyes and pale faces. They had trained for first contact. They had prepared for the possibility of meeting other life in the cosmos, but nothing could have prepared them for this. A transmission cut through the silence. The voice that spoke was deep and harsh, translated by the ship's computer into words that chilled the blood. Unknown vessel, you have entered the sovereign territory of the Dominion. By the authority of High Commander, you are ordered to surrender your ship for processing. Your species is now property of the Dominion. Resistance will result in immediate termination. Captain felt the eyes of her crew upon her. They were afraid. She could see it in their faces, hear it in their breathing. They wanted her to save them, to find a way out of this nightmare. She thought of Earth. She thought of her daughter, who was probably sleeping in her bed right now, dreaming of the mother who had promised to come home. She thought of the billions of humans who had no idea that their entire species had just been claimed as property by an empire they had never heard of. And something inside her, something ancient and stubborn and utterly human, refused to bend. She walked to the communication console. Her hands were steady. Her voice was clear. "This is Captain of the Terran vessel Quiet Defiance. We acknowledge your transmission." She paused, and when she spoke again, every word was carved from stone. "We decline your offer." Silence stretched across the void. They had not expected this response. In 6,000 years of conquest, in the subjugation of over 400 star systems, no species had ever simply refused. High Commander sat in his command throne aboard the flagship Eternal Dominance. He was a massive creature, covered in scales that shimmered like oil on water. His eyes were black and cold, and his mouth was filled with teeth designed for tearing flesh. He had led 40 campaigns of conquest. He had broken the will of species that had ruled their worlds for millions of years. He had never known defeat. The human's response amused him. He ordered his weapons officer to fire a warning shot. A lance of plasma, hot enough to vaporize a small moon, streaked across the bow of the quiet Defiance. The human ship shuddered but did not flee, did not beg, did not surrender. Captain's voice came through the speakers again. "High Commander, I must inform you that I have activated my vessel's emergency beacon. Under Article 7 of the Terran Compact, any act of aggression against a human vessel constitutes an act of war against the entirety of humanity." Leaned forward in his throne, his interest was growing. This tiny creature, commanding a ship he could crush with a thought, was threatening him. "And what," he asked, his voice dripping with contempt, "do you believe your species can do against the Dominion? We have conquered thousands. Your kind is young, weak. You have no fleets, no armies, no power." On the bridge of the quiet Defiance had risen from his seat in the observation lounge. He walked slowly to stand beside Captain. His old eyes studied the alien ships with a strange calm. "Captain," he said quietly, "may I?" Nodded, stepped forward and spoke into the communicator. His voice was soft, almost gentle. "High Commander, my name is. I am a diplomat, though I suspect that word means little to you. I have spent my life studying conflict and peace, war and its alternatives. May I offer you a piece of advice?" Was curious despite himself. "Speak." "Do not mistake our small ship for weakness. Do not mistake our peaceful mission for an inability to fight. And most importantly, do not mistake our calm for fear." The old man smiled, and there was something in that smile that made even pause. "The beacon has been sent. Help is coming. And when it arrives, you will understand why every species you have ever conquered simply gave up when they saw your fleets. They had no hope. We are different. We are human. And we never stop hopping, even when all hope is gone." The transmission ended. High Commander stared at the tiny white ship floating among his warships. For the first time in decades, he felt something strange in his chest. He did not recognize it as the beginning of doubt. The emergency beacon traveled through fold space at speeds that should have been impossible. It punched through the fabric of reality itself, riding currents of energy that human scientists had discovered only 2 centuries ago. They had never seen this technology. They did not know it existed. In their arrogance, they had assumed that all species developed along the same path, at the same pace, with the same limitations. They were wrong. The signal reached Earth in 6 hours. It should have taken 2,000 years. Admiral was sleeping when her communicator screamed to life. She was 61 years old, with silver hair cut short, and a face lined with decades of service. She had commanded the Terran Combined Fleet for 11 years, and she had prayed every single night that she would never have to use it. Tonight, her prayers went unanswered. She read the beacon's data in her quarters, alone in the dark. The information scrolled across her screen in cold, clinical text. First contact. Hostile alien empire. 17 warships. Demands for surrender. A single exploration vessel, 12 souls, standing against an enemy that had conquered 400 star systems. Admiral closed her eyes. She thought of her father, who had told her stories of ancient Earth when she was a child. Stories of warriors who fought against impossible odds. Stories of cities that burned and rose again from ashes. Stories of a species that had nearly destroyed itself 100 times but somehow always survived. She opened her eyes and activated her command console. Within minutes, the order spread across human space like fire through dry grass. Ships that had been sleeping in orbital docks powered up their engines. Crews that had been enjoying shore leave returned to their stations. Weapons that had never been fired in anger warmed to life. 300 dreadnoughts, 12 carrier groups, 40,000 support vessels. The largest armada in human history began to move. And they moved in complete silence. There were no grand speeches, no declarations of war, no announcements to the public. The fleet simply gathered, assembled, and jumped into fold space without a single word transmitted on any frequency. They had no idea they were coming. Their sensors could not detect fold space travel. They had never needed to. Back at the containment zone, High Commander grew impatient. He had given the humans time to understand their situation. He had shown them mercy by not destroying their pathetic vessel immediately, yet they still refused to surrender. He ordered his ships to activate a containment field around the quiet Defiance. The field was designed to prevent escape, to crush the will of captured species, to remind them of their helplessness. The human ship flickered slightly as the energy wrapped around it, but it remained stable. On the bridge, Captain watched the field envelop her ship. Her crew looked to her for guidance, for hope, for anything that might save them from the fate that awaited. "How long?" she asked David. The young sensor officer checked his calculations. The beacon would have reached Earth 6 hours ago. Standard fleet assembly takes 12 hours. Fold space travel to our location. He paused, running numbers in his head. 72 hours at most, probably less. 3 days, said. We need to survive for 3 days. Sat in the corner of the bridge, watching everything with his ancient eyes. He had seen many things in his long life. He had seen nations rise and fall. He had seen peace treaties signed and broken. He had seen the best and worst of humanity, but he had never seen anything quite like this. "Captain," he said softly, "may I make a suggestion?" Nodded. "They don't know what's coming. They think we're alone, helpless, beaten. Let them continue to believe that. Every hour they spend feeling confident is an hour they're not preparing for what's about to happen." Understood immediately. We play weak. We play patient, corrected. There's a difference. Weakness is giving up. Patience is waiting for the right moment. They have never encountered a species that could do both. Meanwhile, had summoned his officers to a strategy meeting aboard the Eternal Dominance. The chamber was vast and dark, filled with holographic displays showing the Dominion's territories. 400 systems, marked in red. Billions of subjugated beings, their will broken, their spirits crushed, their labor fueling the war machine. "The humans are proving difficult," announced. "This is unexpected but not concerning. Begin the cultural extraction process. I want their leader brought before me within the hour." One of his officers, a younger named, hesitated before speaking. "High Commander, our long-range sensors have detected some unusual readings at the edge of our space. Several surveillance stations have gone dark." Waved his hand dismissively. "Equipment malfunction, it happens. Focus on the task at hand." But was not convinced. He had studied other species his entire life. He had learned their languages, their histories, their patterns of behavior. Something about the humans bothered him, though he could not explain why. In the following hours, more reports came in. A supply convoy disappeared without sending a distress signal. A patrol fleet reported strange sensor ghosts before falling silent. A listening post on the edge of Dominion space detected what sounded like whispers in the void, but the translation systems could not decode them. The whispers were human ships, hundreds of stealth vessels that had been seeded throughout the galaxy over centuries of quiet exploration. They had never revealed themselves. They had never fired a weapon. They had simply watched and waited, gathering information about every species they encountered. Now they were awake. They did not attack. They simply observed, mapping defenses, identifying weak points, transmitting data back to the approaching fleet. They moved like ghosts through the darkness, invisible to sensors that had never been designed to detect them. Admiral received their reports in real time. She stood on the bridge of her flagship, the Unyielding Spirit, and studied the tactical displays with cold precision. They were powerful, yes. Their weapons were impressive. Their numbers were vast. But they were also predictable. They fought the same way they had always fought, using tactics that had worked against every species they had encountered. They did not adapt. They did not innovate. They simply overwhelmed their enemies with brute force. Humans were different. 800 years of space travel, 800 years of preparation, 800 years of asking the same question: what if we're not alone, and what if whoever we meet wants to destroy us? The answer was this fleet, these weapons, these tactics refined through centuries of war games and simulations. They had conquered 400 systems by being the strongest. Humanity had spent 8 centuries preparing to face exactly this kind of enemy. Admiral opened a channel to her fleet. Her voice was calm and steady. "All ships, this is Admiral. In 48 hours we will engage the Dominion. Some of us will not survive. I will not lie to you about that. But I want you to understand what we are fighting for. 12 of our people are trapped behind enemy lines. 12 souls who refused to surrender, who stood against an empire and said no. We are going to bring them home, and we are going to make sure that no species in this galaxy ever threatens humanity again." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of 8 centuries of fear and hope and determination. "We move in silence, we strike without warning, and we show the what happens when they threaten our people. Out." The fleet continued toward space, and in the darkness between stars, the silence grew heavy with the promise of what was to come. 3 days felt like 3 years aboard the quiet Defiance. The crew lived in constant fear, watching the alien warships through their viewports, waiting for the moment when they would finally lose patience and destroy them. But Captain kept them focused. She organized duty rotations and rest schedules. She made sure everyone ate, everyone slept, everyone stayed sharp. And every evening she gathered the crew in the observation lounge for what she called family time. They would share stories, play cards, talk about home. They would remind themselves that they were human, that they had each other, that they were not alone. Became the heart of these gatherings. The old diplomat had a gift for telling stories. He spoke of ancient Earth, of warriors and poets, of battles won against impossible odds. He spoke of humanity's darkest moments and how they had survived them all. And he spoke of hope, always hope, burning like a small fire in the endless dark. "We are a stubborn species," he told them one evening. "We have been beaten, broken, burned, and buried. We have done terrible things to each other. We have come close to destroying ourselves more times than we can count, but we are still here. We are always still here. That is what they do not understand. They see our small ship and think we are weak. They see our peaceful mission and think we have no teeth. But humanity has been forged in fire since the first cave dweller picked up a rock and decided to fight back against a world that wanted to kill him. We do not give up. We cannot give up. It is not in our nature." The crew listened with hungry ears. They needed these words. They needed to believe. Meanwhile, strange things were happening throughout space. The reports that Officer had mentioned grew more frequent and more disturbing. Surveillance stations continued to go dark, one after another, creating blind spots in the Dominion's sensor network. Supply convoys vanished without trace. Patrol fleets sent confused messages about sensor ghosts before falling silent. Dismissed these reports at first. Equipment failures, he said. Solar interference. Nothing to worry about. But even he began to feel uneasy as the pattern continued. In 6,000 years, they had never experienced anything like this. Their empire ran like a machine, every part working in perfect order. Now the machine was developing cracks, and no one could explain why. The human stealth ships moved through space like shadows. They were small, designed for observation rather than combat. Their hulls were coated with materials that absorbed sensor signals. Their engines ran so quietly that they barely disturbed the void. They had been built for one purpose: to watch, to learn, to wait. Now they were watching the watchers. Every ship movement was recorded. Every communication was intercepted. Every defensive position was mapped and analyzed. The data flowed back to Admiral's fleet like water flowing to the sea, building a picture of the enemy that grew more detailed by the hour. They were powerful, their weapons could crack planets, their ships numbered in the thousands, their soldiers were fierce and disciplined. But they were also blind. They had conquered so many species without resistance that they had forgotten what it felt like to be hunted. They had grown comfortable, confident, careless. They did not see the trap closing around them. On the third day, High Commander finally lost patience with the humans. He ordered a shuttle to transport Captain to his flagship for interrogation. 2 soldiers boarded the quiet Defiance, their weapons drawn, their black eyes scanning the bridge with contempt. Did not resist. She walked calmly between the soldiers, her hands clasped behind her back, her face showing nothing. As she passed, she gave him a small nod. He nodded back. The shuttle carried her across the void to the Eternal Dominance. The flagship was enormous, a city floating in space, bristling with weapons and covered in the symbols of conquest. Felt the weight of it pressing down on her as she was led through its dark corridors. Waited for her in his command chamber. He was even more massive in person, his scales gleaming under the cold lights, his teeth bared in what might have been a smile. "Captain," he said, his voice echoing through the chamber, "you have caused me considerable inconvenience. Your species was supposed to surrender quietly, as all species do. Instead, you have wasted my time with this pointless resistance." Stood before him, small and fragile compared to his bulk, but her eyes did not waver. "I apologize for the inconvenience, High Commander, but surrender was never an option." Leaned forward. "And why not? What do you hope to achieve? Your ship is trapped, your crew is helpless, no one is coming to save you." "You don't know that." "I know everything," said. "I have conquered 400 systems. I have broken the will of species older than your entire civilization. I have seen empires rise and fall, and I know weakness when I see it. Your species is weak, Captain, young, alone. You have no allies, no great fleet, no ancient weapons. You have nothing." Smiled. It was a small smile, barely visible, but it made pause. "May I tell you a story, High Commander? A story from my—" Gestured impatiently. "Speak." "There was once a small island nation on Earth. It was surrounded by enemies who were larger, stronger, more numerous. Everyone expected this nation to be conquered. Everyone expected its people to submit, but they did not. They fought for years, decades, centuries. They lost battles, lost cities, lost everything except their will to resist. And in the end, their enemies simply grew tired. The small nation survived because it refused to die." She took a step forward, her eyes locked on. "Humanity is that small nation, High Commander. We have spent our entire existence fighting against things that should have destroyed us. Ice ages, plagues, wars, our own worst instincts. We have been pushed to the edge of extinction more times than you can imagine, and we are still here. Do you want to know why?" Said nothing. "Because we do not know how to give up. Because every time someone tells us we cannot win, we take that as a challenge. Because the more impossible the odds, the harder we fight." She paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was soft but carried weight like stone. "Your dominion has existed for 6,000 years. In that time, you have never encountered a species like us. You have never faced an enemy that would rather die than submit. And you have never, ever seen what humanity looks like when it is angry." Stared at her for a long moment. Then he laughed, a harsh sound that filled the chamber. "Bold words for a prisoner, but words will not save you, Captain. When your ship is processed and your crew is broken, you will understand the truth. They always win. It is the natural order of things." Was escorted back to her ship. She did not speak during the journey, did not show any emotion, but inside she was counting the hours. The fleet would arrive soon. And then the natural order of things would change forever. That night, High Commander retired to his quarters. He sat alone in the darkness, thinking about the human captain and her strange confidence. He thought about the surveillance stations that had gone dark. He thought about the silence that seemed to grow heavier with each passing hour. For the first time in his long life, he could not sleep. Something was coming. He could feel it in his bones. But by the time he understood what it would already be too late. The human fleet emerged from fold space at 17 different points simultaneously. There was no warning, no announcement, no declaration of war. One moment, the systems were quiet and secure. The next moment, 300 dreadnoughts and 40,000 support vessels appeared out of nothing. Each emergence point was a critical location: military bases, communication hubs, supply depots, shipyards. In a single instant, the nervous system of the Dominion was cut into pieces. High Commander was on the bridge of the Eternal Dominance when the alarms began screaming. Officers ran to their stations, shouting reports that made no sense, enemies appearing from nowhere, ships that moved faster than anything they had ever seen, weapons that punched through shields as if they did not exist. Impossible breathed, "This is impossible." But the tactical displays did not lie. The humans had come, and they had come in force. Admiral's voice cut through the chaos on all frequencies. Her words were calm, measured, almost gentle. "Attention, Dominion. This is Admiral of the Terran Combined Fleet. You are holding 12 of our citizens against their will. This is unacceptable. You have 1 hour to release them and withdraw from this sector. If you refuse, we will remove you by force. There will be no further warnings. Out." So officers looked to him for guidance. They had never faced anything like this. Their enemies had always been weaker, slower, less advanced. They had always won by simply showing up in greater numbers. But now they were the ones who were outnumbered. Now they were the ones whose technology seemed primitive. Now they were the ones who were afraid. "Battle stations," commanded, his voice steady despite the cold fear growing in his chest. "All ships, engage the enemy. Show these humans what happens when they challenge the Dominion." The fleet surged forward, 17 warships against the human vessels near the quiet Defiance. Thousands more rushing from other systems to join the fight. They still had numbers. They still had experience. They had never lost. They were about to learn what that word meant. The battle began with light. Human weapons fired beams of concentrated energy that cut through shields like knives through paper. The technology was beyond anything the Dominion had encountered. 8 centuries of human paranoia had produced weapons designed to fight gods, and they were merely conquerors. The first warship died in seconds. Its shields flickered and failed. Its hull tore open like fruit. Its crew never even had time to scream. 5 more ships followed in the next minute, their deaths painted across the void in fire and debris. But it was not just the weapons that shocked it was the way the humans fought. Human pilots flew their ships with a recklessness that bordered on madness. They dove into enemy formations, weaving between larger vessels, striking at weak points with surgical precision. When their ships were damaged, they did not retreat. They accelerated. They rammed their burning fighters into enemy gun emplacements, destroying weapons that would have killed their comrades. Human Marines boarded vessels through breaches in their hulls. They fought hand to hand in the dark corridors, armed with weapons and bare fists and a fury that they had never seen. They did not stop when they were wounded. They did not stop when they were dying. They fought until their bodies gave out, and sometimes they fought even after that. A human destroyer, crippled and bleeding atmosphere, detected a civilian transport ship in the crossfire. The transport was not human. It carried members of a species that had enslaved centuries ago. The destroyer had no strategic reason to protect it. The battle was won. The lives aboard that transport were not human lives. The destroyer moved anyway. It positioned its burning hull between the transport and the enemy weapons. It took hit after hit, its crew dying at their stations, until the transport escaped to safety. Then, and only then, did it finally go dark. Watched this from his bridge. He watched his fleet crumble. He watched his ships burn. He watched everything he had built over 40 campaigns turn to ash and debris. And he finally understood what had tried to tell him. Humanity did not fight because they thought they would win. They did not calculate odds or measure advantages. They fought because something inside them, something ancient and unbreakable, simply could not accept defeat. They fought for their own people, yes, but they also fought for strangers. They sacrificed themselves for beings they had never met, would never know, would never be thanked by. This was not warfare as they understood it. This was something else, something they had no word for in their language. The battle lasted 4 hours. By the end, the fleet was shattered. 12 of their 17 warships near the Quiet Defiance were destroyed. The rest had fled or surrendered. Across Dominion space, the story was the same. Human forces struck hard and fast, destroying military targets while carefully avoiding civilian areas. The message was clear. Humanity could have wiped them from existence. They chose not to. Admiral's shuttle docked with the Eternal Dominance as the last fires died. She walked through the damaged corridors of the flagship, past wounded soldiers who stared at her with eyes full of confusion and fear. She was small, this human, old, unarmed, yet she walked as if she owned the universe. She found on his bridge, sitting alone among the wreckage of his command. His officers were dead or fled. His empire was broken. His pride was dust. "High Commander," said, her voice neither triumphant nor cruel, "your fleet is destroyed. Your military installations are captured. Your communication network is under our control. The war is over." Looked at her with eyes that had seen 6,000 years of victory. "How?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "How is this possible? You are young. You are weak. You should have been nothing." Sat down across from him. She was silent for a long moment, choosing her words carefully. "We are not weak," she said finally. "We have simply been quiet. Your Dominion has spent 6,000 years conquering species that had never learned to fight. You mistook their surrender for proof of your superiority. But they did not surrender because you were stronger. They surrendered because they had never faced a true predator before, and they did not know what else to do." She leaned forward, her old eyes meeting his ancient gaze. "Humanity has faced true predators since the beginning of our existence. We have fought ice and fire and famine and disease. We have fought each other with rocks and sticks and nuclear weapons. We have come within a breath of extinction more times than we can count, and we are still here. Do you know why, High Commander?" Shook his head. "Because every time the universe tried to destroy us, we looked at it and said no. Not today, not ever. We are human. We do not surrender. We do not give up. And we do not forgive those who threaten our people." She stood and walked to the viewport. Outside, the debris of the fleet drifted through space like fallen leaves. "Your Dominion enslaved hundreds of species. You broke their spirits and stole their futures. That ends today. You will release every slave. You will pay reparations to every world you conquered, and you will never wage aggressive war again." She turned back to face him. "Or we will return, and next time we will not be merciful." Looked at the small human who had destroyed his empire. He thought about fighting. He thought about refusing. He thought about all the pride and glory and power that had defined his existence. Then he thought about the human destroyer that had died protecting strangers. He thought about the fury he had seen in human eyes. He thought about what would happen if he said no. "What would you have me do?" he asked. Admiral smiled. It was not a cruel smile, it was almost sad. "Help me end this war. Help me build something better. Show the galaxy that even conquerors can learn to change." It was not what it expected. It was not what any had ever been offered. For the first time in 6,000 years, a high commander bowed his head to another species. "Very well," he said, "I will help." The war was over, the reckoning had come. And humanity, the youngest species in the galaxy, had changed everything. The galaxy was different now. Everyone could feel it. The old order had crumbled in a matter of hours, and something new was rising from the ashes. The treaty was signed 3 weeks after the battle. Representatives from the Dominion, the Terran government, and a dozen formerly enslaved species gathered on a neutral station to witness history. High Commander stood beside Admiral as the documents were sealed, his massive form bent in what almost looked like respect. The terms were harsh but fair. They would release all enslaved populations immediately. They would pay reparations to every world they had conquered, helping to rebuild what they had destroyed. They would reduce their military to defensive forces only, surrendering the weapons of conquest forever. And they would face justice for their crimes, through courts that included representatives from every species they had wronged. Some argued that humanity should have demanded more. They should have destroyed the Dominion completely, wiped them from existence, made sure they could never threaten anyone again. But Admiral refused. "Revenge is easy," she said when asked about her decision. "Any fool can destroy an enemy. It takes wisdom to turn an enemy into something else. The ruled through fear for 6,000 years. If we rule through fear, we are no better than them. We must be better. We must show the galaxy that strength and mercy can exist together." Not everyone agreed. Some humans wanted blood. Some of the freed species wanted them to suffer as they had suffered. The anger was understandable and did not dismiss it. She simply asked them to wait, to give peace a chance, to see what the future might hold. Slowly, reluctantly, they agreed. The quiet Defiance returned to Earth 2 months after the battle. The small white ship, battered and but still flying, emerged from fold space to find a fleet waiting to escort her home. Thousands of vessels, military and civilian, had gathered to welcome the crew that had started it all. Captain stood on her bridge as Earth grew larger in the viewport. She had not slept properly in weeks. She had given interviews, attended ceremonies, shaken hands with politicians and generals and ordinary people who wanted to thank her. Everyone called her a hero. She did not feel like a hero. She felt tired. She felt old. She felt like a woman who had done what needed to be done and now wanted nothing more than to see her daughter. The ceremonies were endless. Medals were given, speeches were made, promises were spoken. Accepted it all with grace, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought about her crew who had stood beside her through the darkest hours. She thought about who were learning to be something other than conquerors. She thought about all the lives that had been changed because one small ship had refused to surrender. When they offered her the Medal of Terra, the highest honor humanity could bestow, she shook her head. "I don't want it," she said quietly. "I didn't do anything special. I stood my ground, that's all. Any human would have done the same." The officials insisted, refused again. "Give it to David," she said. "He kept our sensors running when everything was falling apart. Give it to the engineers who held our ship together with wire and hope. Give it to the crew of the destroyer that died protecting strangers. They are the heroes. I just gave orders." In the end, she accepted only one honor, a small ceremony where she was reunited with her daughter. The girl was 12 now, tall and serious with her mother's sharp eyes. She had watched the news. She had seen the battles. She had spent weeks wondering if her mother would ever come home. When finally embraced her, holding her tight as if she might disappear, she felt something break inside her. All the fear, all the tension, all the weight of responsibility finally let go. She cried. Her daughter cried. The cameras captured the moment, and it spread across human space like wildfire. This was what they had fought for. Not glory, not power, not revenge, just this. A mother holding her child, a family made whole again. Retired after the war, he had done his part, spoken his words, played his role in the drama of history. Now he wanted peace. He returned to Earth, to a small house in the mountains, where he could watch the sunset and read his books and think about all the things he had seen. One evening he watched the broadcast of a new development. The Galactic Council, a body of ancient species who had observed the war from afar, had formally requested a human delegation. For millions of years, they had watched younger species rise and fall. They had seen empires come and go. They had never intervened, never offered guidance, never shared their wisdom. Now they wanted to talk. The broadcast showed the human ambassadors arriving at the council station. They were young compared to the beings who greeted them. Young as a species, young as a civilization, young as members of the galactic community. But they walked with confidence. They spoke with clarity. They carried themselves like they belonged. The oldest species in the galaxy looked at the youngest with something that might have been surprise, or respect, or perhaps, for the first time in eons, hope. Smiled as he watched. He poured himself a drink, a simple whiskey from a distillery that had been making the same recipe for 300 years. He raised his glass to the screen. "Not bad," he said to the empty room. "Not bad at all, for a species that almost destroyed itself a dozen times before we ever reached the stars." He thought about all the humans who had lived and died to bring their species to this moment. The cavemen who had fought off predators with sharpened stones, the farmers who had tamed wild lands, the scientists who had unlocked the secrets of the universe, the soldiers who had given their lives so others could live, the dreamers who had looked at the stars and said, "We will go there. We will see what lies beyond." Every one of them had contributed something. Every one of them had pushed humanity forward, even if only by a single step. And now, finally, they had reached a destination that none of them could have imagined. The galaxy would never be the same. They were learning to be neighbors instead of conquerors. The freed species were rebuilding their civilizations. The ancient races were opening their doors for the first time in. And humanity, the small, stubborn species from a small blue world, was helping to build something new. There would be challenges ahead. There always were. New enemies would rise. Old wounds would take time to heal. The universe was vast and cold and full of dangers that no one could predict. But humanity had faced challenges before. They had overcome them before. They would overcome them again. Because that was what they did. That was who they were. Finished his drink and set down the glass. Outside his window, the stars were beginning to appear in the darkening sky. He looked at them for a long moment, thinking about all the worlds they represented, all the stories they contained, all the futures they promised. Somewhere out there, Captain was putting her daughter to bed, telling her stories about the stars. Somewhere out there, Admiral was planning the next steps of humanity's expansion into the cosmos. Somewhere out there, former enemies were learning to become friends, and former slaves were learning to be free. And somewhere out there, in the vast darkness between galaxies, other species were watching. They had seen what humanity had done. They had witnessed the fury and the mercy, the strength and the compassion. They were asking themselves what this new power meant for the future of the universe. They would find out in time. Everyone would find out. But for now there was peace. For now there was hope. For now there was a quiet after the storm, a chance to breathe and heal and dream. Closed his eyes and smiled. The universe was strange and beautiful and terrifying and wonderful. And humanity, against all odds, had earned its place in it. The stars burned on, eternal and patient, waiting to see what would happen next.